Hey my nerds, welcome back. This week's video is on the subject of conflict, the magical tool that writers use to keep their audience's attention gripped. It's a hard one to master, so let's get on with my tips for you. The biggest problem when it comes to using conflict as a writer is recognizing when you've got it wrong. It's a hurdle for new writers, and it's often one that experienced writers stumble at also. I watched The Sandman this week, and as much as I love the first part of the season, problems with conflict plagued the second half of the series, and they seriously diminished my enjoyment of it. I gave Peter feedback the other day on a manuscript, and the recipient of the feedback actually said that they had known something was wrong, but they just couldn't quite figure out what it was. This is an author instinct in development, and it takes a lot of practice and self-honesty to get it the rest of the way. So what's the best way of honing it? Beta readers can obviously help a lot. Get them to let you know where they lost interest in your manuscript. You can even ask them to rate each chapter individually by how interesting they found it. It's a simple trick that helps you see where their interest drops and therefore where the problems might be. So get your beta readers to help you identify where you've gone wrong. But what then? Recognizing the problem is only part of the battle when it comes to conflict. So how do you actually fix it? Unfortunately, there's no magic bullet here. Every writer goes wrong at a different point, but once you've identified where you've strayed, then you can start analysing your story and figure out where you've gone wrong. To do this, there are 3 key questions you need to ask of this point in your story. First of all, who is the reader supposed to care about? Secondly, what are the stakes for those characters the reader is supposed to care about? And thirdly, what are the unresolved curiosities that should be keeping the reader hooked at this stage? Those 3, the unresolved, the character, and their stakes, are the trifecta of conflict, and they'll help you identify where the problem is. If you can't answer any of those questions, then you already have a very good starting point to work from. So how do we figure out what went wrong and how to fix it? First of all, we need to check that the unresolved, the character, and their stakes have all been effectively established at this point. First up, the characters. Does the reader care about the protagonist at this point? This is a tricky one because of taste. Not everyone is going to like all your characters always, but if you have a character who is either relatable, admirable, fascinating, or a combination of those 3, then you're probably well on your way to getting this right. Relatable characters are those the reader can see themselves in, and so can easily connect with and care about a lot. Admirable characters are those the reader wishes they were, and so they live their dreams through, and therefore they care about because nobody likes having their dreams crushed. Fascinating characters are those that are so different from us that we just can't look away. You don't necessarily need to care about these characters, but you are so curious about them. Figure out which of these 3 or combinations of these emotions you're trying to convey, and check to see that you already have plenty of opportunities in your story to get that across to your reader at this point in time. If everything that is supposed to make the character admirable to your readers happened in their backstory, then you might have a problem because you might not actually be explaining why they are an admirable character to your audience. So that's character. Next up are their stakes. This is the so what. The unresolved, which if it isn't achieved, then what difference does this make to the character the readers are supposed to care about? The biggest problem with this usually happens when the stakes either weren't set up well, or they weren't set up at all earlier on in the story, or the stakes were too uncompelling to last the reader all the way through the story. If you didn't set them up well enough, then that just means going back and making them clearer. If they aren't compelling enough though, then either you need to go back and up the ante at the start by establishing different stakes, or you might want to think about adding in new sub-stakes that will keep the reader interested in the meanwhile while they get onto resolving the main one. Which leads me on to number 3, the unresolved. These are the questions holding your reader's attention. Will the main character survive the situation they're in? Will they figure out the mystery of who killed their parents? Will they get the girl? Readers get hooked through their curiosity. The more unresolved, the more reasons they have to keep reading. But don't go too heavy-handed on this, as it might make it difficult for you to resolve all of these issues by the end of the story, and readers might be left unsatisfied if you don't resolve them all, or at least most of them. Now, I would be remiss at this point if I didn't mention the importance of having an antagonist actively increasing the sources of conflict in your story. Whatever type of story you have, man versus nature, man versus society, man versus man, man versus self, or a mixture of all of these, there is always at least one antagonist creating conflict for the protagonist. A quick win when it comes to increasing the conflict of your story is to increase the threat from the antagonist. In a man versus nature example of a woman trying to maintain her family farm at the base of a mountain that's actually a volcano, well, in this example, the sense of looming peril could be increased just by making the volcano seem a little bit closer to explosion. Whatever your plot, the antagonist, whoever or whatever they are, should be acting in direct opposition to the interests of the protagonist. So as long as you've properly set up your trifecta of character, stakes, and unresolved, then every scene you amp the antagonist up, you'll push the protagonist down. Alright, my nerds, I hope this helps some of you who are struggling through conflict in your stories right now. Good luck fixing it, and I wish upon your characters much increased peril. See you next week, my nerds. Bye!